need to speak with you.
I'm just shopping, officer.
Reports of suspicious activity nearby. I need your ID.
What exactly is suspicious?
I said ID now.
Mom?
I'm getting the ID
Keep
you
your
asked
hands
for.
where I can
Here,
see 'em.
license. Where do you work? Why this store? You got a record?
I'm a federal consultant.
The produce aisle was loud that Wednesday afternoon. The chatter of shoppers, the squeak of cart wheels, the ambient hum of a moderately crowded supermarket doing what supermarkets do. Christine Patterson was there for the same reason most people were: fresh vegetables, a few snacks, the kind of errand that takes 20 minutes and asks nothing of you. She wore a gray hoodie and jeans. Nothing about her appearance suggested anything other than a mother running a routine errand with her 2 young children at her side. But to the officer who had just spotted her from the far end of the aisle, something did not sit right, not what she was doing, not what she was wearing. Simply who she was, a black woman, in his store, with her children, existing in a space he had decided she did not belong in. What unfolded over the next 8 minutes was captured from 4 angles by the supermarket security cameras: the aggression, the fabricated justifications, the unchecked authority of a man who had never once been made to answer for the way he treated people. And when the truth about Christine Patterson's real identity came to light, the identity she had quietly carried into that aisle without ever needing to use it, Officer Jeremy Benton understood, with sudden and irreversible clarity, that he had just committed the gravest error of his life. The footage spread, 20,000 views in the first hour, millions by the end of the week. Every frame became the kind of evidence that does not bend, does not negotiate, and does not disappear. It would end one man's career. It would reshape an entire department. And it would reveal something about Christine Patterson that no one in that aisle, not the shoppers, not the manager, not Benton himself, could have anticipated. If you are ready to see institutional racism taken down, like this video and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from. And if this is your first time here, hit that subscribe button right now, because you won't want to miss tomorrow's story of cops messing with the wrong people and finding out. Let's continue. But Christine Patterson was not simply a mother grabbing groceries. That is where this story truly begins. Christine had been in the aisle for less than 3 minutes when she felt it, that particular quality of attention that every black person in America learns to recognize before they can name it, a gaze that is not casual, a presence that is not incidental. She did not turn right away. She continued selecting apples, speaking softly to her 7-year-old son about dinner, her 5-year-old daughter leaning against the cart with quiet contentment. The cart held fruits, yogurt, cereal. Nothing in it suggested anything other than an ordinary errand. The officer who had been watching her was Jeremy Benton, 42, 15 years on the force. His file was thick with complaints: 4 for excessive force, 3 for racial bias, each one buried by superiors who cited stressful encounters and insufficient evidence. Benton had learned that impunity was the default, so long as no one produced proof he could not dismiss. He stopped 12 feet away. His stance carried the weight of a man who had already decided, before speaking, how this was going to go. Christine registered it. She noted the angles of the aisle, the convex mirrors near the bins, the exits. She had navigated far more dangerous rooms than this one, but those encounters had always been clear about what they were. This one wore a badge. Benton moved forward. His first words were not a question. They were a demand, as though selecting produce with 2 small children required justification. Christine responded with even, measured calm. She was shopping. Her tone was polite. It was also firm, and it did not apologize for itself. He did not accept it. He closed the distance, deliberately crowding her space, a tactic the overhead cameras captured without ambiguity. He claimed reports of suspicious activity nearby. A practiced line. Christine asked what, specifically, qualified as suspicious. It was a reasonable question. Benton received it as defiance. His expression shifted on camera from practiced neutrality to something rawer, closer to irritation at being challenged. He could not provide specifics, because there were none. So he demanded identification, his volume rising as he did, as though volume alone could manufacture the authority his position had failed to produce. Christine knew she had no legal obligation to produce identification absent an accusation of a crime. She also knew that refusing in front of her children could spiral into something far worse. She waited, their frightened faces, the way her daughter had begun pressing closer to her leg, and she chose to comply, slowly. With her hands visible, she reached for her purse. Benton's hand moved to his weapon. He commanded her to keep her hands where he could see them, even as she was doing precisely that, even as he had been the one to demand the identification she was reaching to produce. The contradiction was not subtle. The cameras recorded it with clinical precision: comply, and be threatened for the manner of your compliance. Christine extracted her wallet and offered her driver's license with both palms open. Benton took it without looking at it and held it, turning it over, studying it with a scrutiny that served no investigative purpose. The license was valid. The photograph was hers. The name was real. He found nothing, and he did not return it. Instead, he began asking questions: her employer, why this store, whether she had a criminal record. Each one designed not to gather information but to force her to defend, in public, her right to be there. Her children clung tighter. Her daughter let out a soft whimper. End quote. Christine described her role in vague terms: a federal consultant, she said, close enough to the truth to be credible. She did not mention the badge, the unit, or the 5 years of undercover operations. To Benton, none of that existed. To Benton, she was simply a black woman who had refused, in his estimation, to shrink. By now, shoppers had gathered. A retired woman with silver-streaked hair, Lydia Thompson, had paused her cart at the edge of the aisle, her expression shifting from curiosity to unease. A couple in business attire, Keith and Vanessa Reed, stood further down, close enough to see the way Christine's children were pressed against her. Their faces carried the kind of recognition that does not need to be explained. Benton noticed them. He did not soften. He pressed forward, as though yielding in front of witnesses would mean something he was not prepared to concede. He ordered Christine to turn around. He ordered her to place her hands against the display. He was going to conduct a pat-down search. Christine asked what crime she was being searched for. He did not answer. He repeated the command. She turned. Slowly, her body angled so that the cameras and the witnesses could see everything. As she did, she spoke clearly, stating for the record that she did not consent to the search, that no crime had been alleged, and that she was complying only to protect her children from further escalation. Her words aligned precisely with the footage. The search was not routine. Benton pressed hard against her sides, shoved her forward into the bins, rummaged her pockets with a grip that exceeded anything a lawful pat-down required. Christine held still. She did not flinch. She did not resist. Her training held her locked in place while her voice continued to narrate what was happening, steady, precise, without emotion. He found nothing. Keys, a phone, a child's snack wrapper. No contraband. No weapon. No evidence of any kind. It did not stop him. He yanked her arm sharp, sudden, hard enough to leave bruises that would later be documented as assault. He spun her back, and in the motion her body struck the display rack. Fruits scattered. Her head hit the shelf. The sound drew gasps from every shopper in the aisle. Her son's voice cut through the noise, a short, raw cry that carried the full weight of a child watching someone hurt his mother. Christine did not strike back. She did not raise her hands. She met Benton's gaze, steady and unblinking, and asked whether she was free to go. Benton said something about respect. He said something about people like her. The words were captured on the recordings with enough clarity that no one who heard them later would need to interpret what they meant. Keith and Vanessa Reed were the first to act. They called it assault loudly, plainly, in a voice that carried down the aisle and registered on every phone that had begun recording. Lydia Thompson dialed 911, her hand unsteady, her voice steady enough to say what was happening and where. Other shoppers joined in. The irony of calling the police on a police officer was not lost on anyone. There was no other number to call. Benton faltered. For the first time in the encounter, something shifted in his posture. Something that looked, on the cameras, very much like fear. The store manager arrived seconds later. Elena Vargas. 10 years managing this location. She knew Christine as a regular, quiet, polite, someone who brought her kids in on weekends. What she saw when she entered the aisle was a woman pressed against a ransacked produce display, bruises forming on her arm, 2 terrified children at her feet, and an officer whose body language had already begun to change. Elena did not raise her voice. She asked Benton, in a tone that was entirely neutral, what had happened. He gave her a version of events that bore no resemblance to what the cameras had recorded. The witnesses interrupted him immediately. Lydia contradicted him directly. Keith and Vanessa showed their footage, and the retired teacher, still on the line with 911, repeated what she had seen. Elena listened. Then she told Benton that the aisle was covered by high-definition cameras with audio. She told him she could pull the footage immediately. She offered to do so. The change in him was visible. His posture stiffened. His jaw tightened. He looked at the cameras as though seeing them clearly for the first time. Then he stepped back and declared the matter resolved. Christine was free to go. The reversal stunned everyone present. Minutes before, he had been slamming her into shelves. Christine straightened. She turned to face him and asked for his name and badge number. He provided both, low, grudging, and witnesses noted them down. Elena stepped beside Christine and told Benton, in a voice that carried, that Christine was a valued customer, that the footage would be preserved, and that every witness present would be made available for any investigation. The power in that aisle had shifted. Everyone felt it. Benton looked at Christine one last time. The glare was caught on camera. Then he turned and walked out of the aisle. Christine did not move until the sound of his footsteps had disappeared entirely. Then she turned toward her children. Her son reached her first. He wrapped both arms around her leg and pressed his face into her side, his small body trembling in a way that had nothing to do with the cold. Her daughter followed, quieter, slower, her cheeks wet, one hand clutching the hem of Christine's hoodie as though letting go was no longer an option. Christine lowered herself. She did not speak. She held them, one arm around each, and stayed that way for a long time while the aisle settled into a different kind of silence around her. The crowd did not leave. It reformed. Shoppers who had been bystanders minutes before moved closer, not with curiosity now, but with something closer to purpose. Lydia Thompson was the first to approach. She introduced herself quietly, and then she did something that Christine would remember long after the bruises had faded. She apologized, not for herself, for the system that had made what just happened possible. Her voice carried the particular weight of a woman who had spent decades watching injustice from the sidelines and had, in the space of 8 minutes, decided she was done doing that. Keith and Vanessa Reed were already on their phones. The footage was uploading before Benton had cleared the end of the aisle. They tagged every activist account, every civil rights organization, every outlet they could think of. The clips were raw, shaky in places, steady in others, but the content was unmistakable. Multiple angles, audio, a mother, her children, an officer with his hand wrapped around her arm. Elena Vargas guided Christine and the children away from the aisle and into the back office of the store, a small, fluorescent-lit room with a desk and a row of monitors that fed from every camera in the building. She brought water. She brought a bag of ice wrapped in a paper towel. She sat Christine down and said nothing for a while, letting the quiet do what words could not. It was in that room, with the adrenaline finally loosening its grip, that Christine's hands began to shake. It was not fear. It was the body's delayed invoice for what it had just endured: the shoves, the strike against the shelf, the sustained act of holding herself still while someone with a badge dismantled her dignity in front of her children. The tremor ran through her fingers and into her wrists, and she pressed her hands flat against her thighs to steady them. She told Elena what she was. Not a federal consultant. An FBI agent. Counterterrorism. 5 years of undercover operations. The irony was too precise to ignore. The woman the system was designed to protect had just been brutalized by a piece of that system, in front of the people she loved most. But there was another layer. Christine had not come to that store by accident. She had been tailing a low-level informant connected to a corruption probe that reached into the local police department. She had been watching him from 2 aisles over when Benton appeared, and now, thinking back, she could see it the way his eyes had moved, not toward her, but toward the informant's aisle first. The nervous glance. The recalculation. Benton had not profiled her out of habit alone. He had seen her watching, and something in him had understood what that watching might mean. Elena listened to all of it. Then she picked up the phone. She called the department first, not to report an officer, but to create a record that could not be erased. Then she called corporate, and she used a single word that carried the weight of everything that had happened that afternoon: preservation. The footage would not be touched. It would not be overwritten. It would not disappear. The videos went live within the hour. 20,000 views in the first hour, 100,000 by nightfall. The comments came in waves, not the kind that circulate around controversy, but the kind that carry memory. People writing about their own encounters, their own aisles, their own moments of being assumed guilty for no reason other than existing. Before this story goes any further, it is worth pausing here. People like Lydia Thompson, people like the Reeds, ordinary people who actively chose to stay, to film, to speak. If you have ever witnessed something like what happened in that aisle, leave your thoughts in the comments. Share this story if you think someone needs to hear it. That single act is how stories like this survive. Civil rights organizations began reaching out within hours. Attorneys made contact. The evidence was airtight. The department issued a statement that used the phrase, internal review. It landed on social media like a match on dry wood. Protests materialized outside headquarters within 2 days. The media followed. Reporters pulled Benton's file, and what they found was not one incident but a pattern: 4 excessive force complaints, 3 racial bias allegations, each one buried. A nurse came forward. Benton had stopped her 3 years earlier, near her apartment, for no identifiable reason. She had not filed a complaint then. She filed one now. Christine sought medical attention and documented everything: the bruises on her arm, the contusion on her head, photographs, a doctor's report. The kind of evidence that does not argue and does not bend. She retained an attorney, Victoria Hayes, a civil rights lawyer whose record spoke for itself, and Hayes reviewed the footage and the medical documentation and laid out a strategy that was, in its structure, ruthless in its clarity: criminal charges against Benton for assault under color of authority, and a civil lawsuit against both Benton and the department for the negligence that had allowed him to operate unchecked for 15 years. Discovery began. And within the first round of documents, something surfaced that no one outside the FBI had anticipated. Emails. Benton's name in correspondence that connected him thinly at first, then less so, to the very network Christine had been investigating. The pat-down in the produce aisle had not been random. It had not been, in any meaningful sense, about Christine at all. It had been about what she might have seen, what she might have known. A desperate, clumsy act of obstruction by a man who had just realized that the woman he was terrorizing might be the reason his entire operation was about to collapse. The department suspended Benton without pay. Weeks later, they fired him. His certification was revoked. The chief who had buried the complaints resigned under pressure that came from every direction at once: the media, the public, the attorneys, and a department that had suddenly discovered, after 15 years, that it could not afford to look the other way any longer. Christine's children watched all of it unfold. They were shaken. That was visible, and it was real. But they were also watching their mother. And what they saw was not defeat. 1. Her son began talking, in the way children do when something has shifted, something fundamental inside them, about wanting to understand how justice worked. Her daughter drew pictures. In several of them, Christine stood tall, and the figure beside her, small, with wide eyes, stood tall too. The criminal complaint did not go through the department. It went directly to the district attorney's office, and it landed on the desk of a prosecutor named Alex Rivera, who read it in its entirety, watched every minute of the footage, and understood within hours that this was not a case that could be quietly managed. The public was watching. The evidence was irrefutable. Rivera filed charges: assault under color of authority, violation of civil rights, abuse of official capacity. The charges were precise. They were sufficient. They left Benton almost no room to maneuver. The civil lawsuit moved in parallel. Victoria Hayes built it with the precision of someone who understood that the strongest cases are not built on the offense, they are built on the record. She did not need to prove that Benton was a bad officer. The department's own files did that. What she needed to prove was that they had known, and had chosen, for 15 years, to do nothing about it. The twist that had surfaced during discovery did not stay buried. Hayes brought the emails, the connections to Christine's corruption probe, into the case with methodical care. Benton's history did not exist in isolation. It intersected with officers who were themselves under federal investigation. The assault in the produce aisle was not a random act of racism. It was, the evidence suggested, a panicked attempt to neutralize a threat to a network that reached deeper into the department than anyone had publicly acknowledged. Arrests followed. Quietly at first, names that did not make the front page. Then louder. The network that Christine had been investigating before she ever set foot in that grocery store began to come apart, and the thread that unraveled it was a single encounter in a produce aisle on a Wednesday afternoon. 7 months after the incident, the trial began. It was not a close case. The defense attempted, in its opening, to reframe Christine as someone who had been uncooperative, someone whose movements had been ambiguous, whose compliance had been slow enough to justify concern. The footage demolished that argument within the first hour of its presentation. 4 cameras, continuous audio, Christine's hands visible at every moment. Her voice, calm and precise, narrating what was happening in real time. The defense had nothing to place against it that the evidence did not immediately contradict. Lydia Thompson took the stand and described what she had seen, the weight of someone who had believed in the system and watched it fail in 8 minutes. Keith and Vanessa Reed testified next, consistent and unshakable. Elena Vargas followed, and her testimony carried something the others could not. She knew Christine as a person, not a case file. She described the woman in the aisle and the woman in the back office afterward, and the jury understood the distance between the two. Christine testified last. She did not raise her voice. She did not perform emotion. She described what had happened and what it had done to her children, in the same steady manner she had used in the aisle itself. The courtroom went quiet in the way rooms do when something true is being said and no one in the space can look away. Expert witnesses followed, use of force specialists who broke down, frame by frame, the difference between lawful and unlawful physical contact, and who made clear, without ambiguity, that nothing Benton had done in that aisle fell within any recognized standard of police procedure. The defense offered no credible counter. The jury deliberated for 2 hours. Guilty. on every count. The judge who delivered the sentence was a woman who had spent her career in the courtroom watching cases like this come close to accountability and fall short. She did not let that happen here. Her sentencing remarks were not measured or diplomatic. She spoke about the oath that Benton had taken and the specific, documented ways in which he had broken it not once, but repeatedly, over 15 years, while the people responsible for holding him accountable had looked away. She imposed the maximum sentence, 4 years. And she noted, for the record, that the assault had occurred during an active federal investigation, which elevated its implications beyond the local jurisdiction and into territory that would draw scrutiny from agencies far above her courtroom. The civil settlement followed within weeks. The amount was in the 7 figures, a number that reflected not only the physical harm but the institutional failure that had made it possible. Alongside the money came mandated reforms, implicit bias training for every officer in the department, an independent oversight board with real authority, an early warning system designed to flag patterns before they became careers, and a requirement for transparent body camera policies that could not be quietly suspended or selectively reviewed. Lydia Thompson gave an interview after the verdict. She spoke about her grandchildren about wanting, when she looked at them, to believe that the world they were growing into was one where what had happened to Christine Patterson could not happen again. Keith and Vanessa Reed talked about what it had meant to go from spectators to participants, about the shift that had occurred in them, in that aisle, when they had decided that watching was no longer enough. Christine took the settlement money and did not spend it on herself. She created a foundation, a nonprofit dedicated to providing legal aid and community education to victims of police misconduct, people who had been stopped, harassed, brutalized, and told there was nothing they could do about it. She partnered with Victoria Hayes and a network of attorneys willing to take cases pro bono. The foundation offered something that the system had failed to offer Christine in that aisle, a path forward. The corruption probe that had brought Christine to the store in the first place concluded with the dismantling of Benton's network. The arrests, the indictments, the quiet unraveling of a structure that had operated inside the department for years, all of it traced back, in one way or another, to a Wednesday afternoon in a produce aisle. Christine left fieldwork. The foundation became her full-time work training communities on their rights, lobbying for legislative changes, building something that outlasted any single case. 3 years after the incident, a documentary chronicled what had happened and what had followed. It included statistics, the number of encounters that were never filmed, never reported, never prosecuted. The numbers were sobering. But the documentary also included Christine, and the way she talked about the work she was doing, and the way her children talked about her, suggested that something had shifted not just for one family, but for the architecture of accountability itself. Benton served his full sentence. In prison he was not treated well. Former officers rarely are. Upon release he did not resurface publicly. He did not apologize. His name appeared, months later, in a training module used by police departments across the country, not as a lesson in what had gone wrong with one man, but as a case study in what happens when a system decides, for long enough, that it does not need to look. The supermarket installed a small plaque near the entrance to the produce aisle. It did not say much, it did not need to. Christine still shopped there, from time to time. When she did, people recognized her. They greeted her not with pity, but with something that looked, if you watched closely enough, like respect. The kind that is earned not by what a person survives, but by what they build from it.
If you like this video, make sure to hit that like button, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss the next story. Share this video with someone who would appreciate it, and let's keep building this community together. And before you go, drop a comment below. I'd love to hear your thoughts on what stood out to you the most. Until next time, stay safe, stay curious, and I'll see you in the next.